Right now, as you're watching this video, there are more ants crawling around our planet than there are stars in our entire galaxy. We're talking about 20 quadrillion of these tiny creatures. That's a 2 followed by 16 zeros. And here's what'll really mess with your head. Their combined weight equals the weight of every single human being on Earth. But that's just the beginning of this insane story. Because what these microscopic architects have built in secret will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about intelligence, society, and what it means to be alive. You see, somewhere out there right now, a fungus is hijacking an ant's brain, turning it into a mind-controlled zombie that climbs to the perfect height before exploding spores from its skull. Meanwhile, other ants are using their own babies as living glue guns to construct multi-story tree houses that would make human engineers weep with envy. And in the depths of underground megacities, millions of workers are speaking a chemical language so sophisticated it rivals human speech, all while living lives so sacrificial that scientists are questioning whether these creatures are even individuals anymore, or if they've evolved into something far more terrifying and beautiful. The truth about ant colonies isn't just fascinating. It's going to change how you see life itself, because these tiny insects have cracked codes that we're still struggling with, built civilizations that dwarf our own, and created a form of collective intelligence that might be the most advanced form of consciousness on our planet. And what you're about to discover will leave you staring at every anthill differently, wondering if you're looking at millions of individuals or one massive alien mind. The invisible army among us, picture this. For every single human walking around on Earth right now, there are 2.5 million ants going about their business. They're in your backyard, under your feet, in the walls of your house, and crawling through forests, deserts, and grasslands on every continent except Antarctica. We share this planet with an army so massive that if they decided to organize against us, we wouldn't stand a chance. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. These aren't just random insects bumbling around. They've conquered nearly every environment on Earth through sheer brilliance and cooperation. We're talking about creatures that have figured out agriculture, architecture, warfare, and communication systems that put our ancient civilizations to shame. While our ancestors were still figuring out fire, ants had already built underground cities, developed complex supply chains, and mastered chemical warfare. Think about the last time you saw an ant. Probably just seemed like a tiny, insignificant bug, right? Wrong. That single ant you saw was part of a network so sophisticated that it makes the internet look like child's play. Every ant is connected to its colony through chemical signals, physical touch, and behavioral cues that create a living, breathing supercomputer made of flesh and instinct. And their impact on our world, absolutely staggering. Ants move more earth than earthworms, spread more seeds than birds, and control pest populations better than any pesticide we've ever created. They've literally shaped the evolution of thousands of other species, from plants that grow special nectar just to feed them, to other insects that have evolved to look exactly like ants to avoid being eaten. But what you don't know about their secret lives will blow your mind, because the way these colonies are born involves a journey so perilous and a sacrifice so profound that it makes Game of Thrones look like a children's bedtime story. The birth of a superorganism, every ant empire, begins with a single female's desperate gamble with her life. When a colony reaches a certain size, something extraordinary happens. The queen starts laying special eggs that hatch into winged ants destined for royalty. These aren't your regular worker ants. These are the chosen ones, born with wings and a mission that will either make them rulers of vast underground kingdoms or end their lives within hours. On a day that scientists call the nuptial flight, thousands of these winged ants take to the skies in what can only be described as nature's most brutal reality show. Males and future queens mate in midair, while dodging birds, spiders, and other predators that know exactly when this aerial buffet is happening. After mating, every single male drops dead. Their only purpose in life complete. But for the females, the real nightmare is just beginning. They crash land wherever they can, immediately rip off their own wings. They'll never fly again, and start digging frantically into the ground, searching for the perfect spot to start their empire. Here's the gut-wrenching part. Out of every 500 new queens that attempt this journey, only one will survive long enough to establish a successful colony. The rest become meals for spiders, birds, or other ants. The lucky survivors who make it underground face months of complete isolation. They seal themselves in tiny chambers and begin laying eggs. But here's what'll freak you out. They have no food. So, they start digesting their own flight muscles, the very wings that got them there, to feed their first batch of babies. They're literally eating themselves alive to give birth to their empire. Those first worker ants that hatch are tiny, weak, and malnourished because their mother gave everything she had just to create them. But once they break through to the surface and start bringing back food, something incredible happens. The queen transforms into an egg-laying machine capable of producing up to 300 million offspring in her lifetime. That's more babies than there are people in the United States, all from one mother. But here's where this story takes a dark turn that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and what it means to be alive. Because those millions of worker ants that emerge from these eggs are born into lives so sacrificial, so devoted to their mother's cause, that they'll work themselves to exhaustion and choose their own extinction rather than betray the colony. The chemical language that rules everything for decades. Scientists knew there was something special about how ants coordinated their activities, but they had no clue how these nearly blind, almost deaf insects were managing to build complex societies and organize military campaigns that would make human generals jealous. The mystery was driving researchers absolutely crazy until one man decided to do something that sounds completely insane. He started crushing ant body parts and watching what happened. E.O. Wilson, a Harvard biologist who would later become known as the father of modern ant research, spent months painstakingly dissecting fire ant abdomens, crushing each tiny organ with an applicator stick, and smearing the resulting ant juice onto pieces of paper. Day after day, he'd place these chemical smears in front of living ants and watch for reactions. Most of the time, the ants couldn't care less about his experiments. But then Wilson stumbled upon an organ that had never been studied before, something called Dufour's gland. When he crushed this microscopic structure and spread its contents across paper, the ants went absolutely mental. They immediately started following the chemical trail with an intensity that was almost frightening, as if Wilson had just discovered their secret language. And that's exactly what he had done. What Wilson found was that ants have developed the most sophisticated chemical communication system in the animal kingdom. We're talking about over 20 different pheromones that can be combined like words in a sentence to create complex messages. But here's where it gets truly mind-blowing. African weaver ants have taken this chemical language to levels that rival human speech. When a weaver ant worker discovers food, she doesn't just leave a simple food this way message. She creates a chemical sentence by depositing specific secretions from her rectal gland while running back to the nest, then adds physical punctuation by waving her head and touching other ants with her antennae when she encounters them. It's like she's speaking in chemical paragraphs with physical gestures as her body language. But the most terrifying example of their communication happens when they detect an enemy. A single worker ant releases a 4-chemical alarm system that's basically the insect equivalent of a military command sequence. The first chemical tells every nearby ant to be alert. The second one commands them to search for trouble. The third chemical screams, "Get closer and bite anything that moves." And the final compound essentially tells them to go completely nuts and attack everything. Scientists have discovered that this combination of chemical signals follows rules of syntax and grammar that are scarily similar to human language. These tiny insects are having conversations, giving directions, sharing gossip, and coordinating military strikes using a language painted in molecules that we can't even smell. This communication allows them to build structures that would make human architects jealous, because when millions of individuals can talk to each other with this level of precision, they can accomplish things that seem to defy the laws of physics. Living architecture defying physics. Imagine trying to build a skyscraper using nothing but your bare hands and your own spit as glue, while hanging upside down from a tree branch, with no blueprints and no supervisor telling you what to do. Sounds impossible, right? Well, weaver ants do this every single day, and their constructions are so advanced that human engineers study them to improve our own building techniques. These remarkable insects don't live on the ground like most ants. They've conquered the trees, building elaborate multi-room mansions high up in the canopy. But here's the crazy part. They don't have any building materials except what nature provides. So they've learned to turn living leaves into architectural masterpieces. The construction process starts when a single ant scout discovers a bendable leaf. She grabs the edge and starts pulling, testing to see if it'll curve the way she wants. If the leaf shows promise, she releases a chemical signal that essentially says, "I've got something good here. Come help me." Within minutes, other workers start arriving, and that's when the real magic begins. The ants line up in perfect rows along the leaf edge, each one gripping tightly and pulling in synchronized harmony. But sometimes, the gap between two leaves is too wide for a single chain of ants to bridge. When this happens, they perform an acrobatic feat that seems to defy gravity. They create living bridges by linking their bodies together, with some ants hanging from others in chains that can stretch up to 10 worker lengths. Picture this. Ants are literally using other ants as construction equipment, with some serving as anchor points while others dangle in midair, stretching their bodies to maximum length until they can grab hold of the opposite leaf. It's like watching a circus act where the performers are also the rigging, the safety net, and the audience all at the same time. But the most incredible part is how they seal these leaves together once they're positioned correctly. You might expect them to use mud, or tree sap, or some kind of natural glue. But what weaver ants do is so bizarre, it sounds like science fiction. They use their own babies as living glue guns. The worker ants carefully collect larvae that are in their final stages of development and carry them in their jaws to the construction site. Then, holding these baby ants like tools, they move them back and forth across the leaf edges, while the larvae respond by spinning silk threads. The ants are literally using their own children as construction equipment, and somehow the babies seem perfectly fine with this arrangement, producing thousands of silk threads that bind the leaves together into a waterproof, windproof structure. This level of cooperation and innovation has allowed ants to create some of the most impressive structures in the natural world. Army ants form temporary bridges with their bodies that can support weights 200 times heavier than a single ant. Other species build underground cities with climate control, garbage disposal systems, and specialized rooms for different activities. But their most terrifying enemy isn't another colony or a human stepping on their nest. It's something far more sinister that can turn their greatest strength, their unity, into their deadliest weakness. The zombie apocalypse is real deep in the rainforests of Thailand. Something straight out of a horror movie is happening right now. An ant worker is climbing higher and higher up a plant stem, but she's not searching for food or building materials. She's been hijacked by a fungus that's taken complete control of her brain, turning her into a zombie with one final gruesome mission. The fungus is called Ophiocordyceps, and it's evolution's most terrifying puppeteer. When spores land on an ant's body, they don't just infect her. They stage a complete hostile takeover of her nervous system. The fungus spreads through her body like microscopic tentacles, wrapping around her brain and muscles while keeping her alive and functional. But she's no longer in control of her own actions. For days, the infected ant continues her normal routine while the fungus quietly maps out her entire nervous system. Then, when the timing is perfect, the fungus flips and takes direct control. The ant abandons whatever she was doing and starts climbing, not randomly, but with a specific purpose that's absolutely chilling. The fungus knows exactly what it's doing. It forces the ant to climb to a height of precisely 25 centimeters above the ground. Not higher, not lower, but exactly where the temperature and humidity are perfect for what comes next. When the ant reaches this sweet spot, the fungus makes her clamp her jaws onto a leaf or stem with such force that she can never let go. And then, the ant becomes a grotesque nursery. The fungus starts growing out of her body, usually bursting through the back of her head in a structure that looks like something from an alien movie. This fruiting body is perfectly positioned to rain spores down onto the ant trails below, where new victims are waiting to be infected. But here's what'll really mess with your head. This fungus is incredibly species-specific. The strain that infects carpenter ants won't work on leafcutter ants, and vice versa. Each fungus has evolved to know exactly which chemical cocktail will hijack which ant species' brain. It's like having a master key that only works on one specific lock, but knowing exactly which chemicals will unlock the mind of your chosen victim. Scientists have discovered that different ant species get zombified in different ways. Some climb high like the Thai forest ants. Others get forced to climb down and bite onto roots underground, and still others are made to crawl inside flowers, where the fungus can use the plant's own systems to spread its spores. This mind control reveals something deeply unsettling about what ants really are. Because if their behavior can be so completely hijacked by a fungus, if their individual will can be overridden so easily, it makes you wonder whether these creatures ever had individual consciousness in the first place, or if they've evolved into something far stranger than we ever imagined. Are they even individuals anymore? Here's a question that's been haunting scientists for decades, and will probably keep you awake tonight. When you look at an ant colony, are you seeing millions of individual creatures? Or are you looking at one massive, distributed organism that just happens to be made up of separate bodies? Think about it this way. Your body is made up of trillions of individual cells, but you don't think of yourself as a committee of cellular organisms making decisions by consensus. You're one person with one consciousness controlling all those cells. What if ant colonies work the same way, but at a much larger scale? The evidence for this mind-bending theory is everywhere once you start looking for it. Worker ants share food through a process called trophallaxis. They literally vomit partially digested food into each other's mouths, passing nutrients throughout the colony like blood circulation in a body. The queen is like a reproductive organ. The workers function as hands, eyes, and muscles, and their chemical communication system serves as the nervous system connecting it all together. But here's where it gets really disturbing. When a queen passes away, the workers don't do what logic would suggest. They don't try to raise a new queen to replace her. They don't attempt to join another colony, and they don't try to become reproductive themselves. Instead, they just stop. The entire colony enters what can only be described as a collective depression, gradually declining until every last worker has passed from existence. It's like watching a body shut down when the heart stops beating. The workers continue their daily routines for a while, but with no new eggs being laid, no new members joining the workforce, the colony slowly fades away. They're choosing collective extinction over survival without their queen, which suggests a level of unity that goes way beyond simple cooperation. This behavior is so alien to how we understand individual survival instincts that it's forced scientists to completely reconsider what we mean by individual. If these workers have no self-preservation instinct, if they can't survive independently, if they share resources like organs in a body, and if they choose collective demise over individual survival, are they really separate organisms? Or are they really separate organisms? Or more like mobile organs of a larger creature? The most advanced ant societies, leafcutters, army ants, weaver ants, show virtually no competition between workers. They don't fight over resources. They don't try to improve their own positions. And they don't attempt to reproduce. Their individual interests have been completely subsumed into the collective good, creating something that biologists call a superorganism. In a superorganism, the colony becomes the actual unit of life, with individual ants serving roles similar to cells in your body. The queen is the reproductive system, Different castes of workers serve as different organ systems, and the nest itself becomes the body that houses this distributed consciousness. This realization has created one of the biggest debates in evolutionary biology, because if colonies can evolve as single units, if natural selection can act on the group level rather than just on individuals, then we need to completely rewrite our understanding of how evolution works. And that revelation has implications that extend far beyond just understanding ants. Rewriting the rules of evolution for most of the 20th century, biologists were pretty confident they had evolution figured out. It was all about genes competing with other genes, individuals competing with other individuals, and the most successful genetic combinations passing on to the next generation. This view was popularized by Richard Dawkins in The Selfish Gene, and it explained most of what we saw in nature pretty well. But then scientists started studying ants more closely, and everything began to fall apart. The standard model of evolution just couldn't explain how worker ants could evolve to be completely sterile, dedicating their entire lives to helping their queen reproduce while never having offspring of their own. If evolution is supposed to favor individuals who pass on their own genes, how could natural selection possibly create creatures who sacrifice everything for others? E.O. Wilson, the same scientist who cracked the code of ant communication, became convinced that something much bigger was happening. He argued that in the most advanced ant societies, natural selection wasn't just acting on individual ants, it was acting on entire colonies as single evolutionary units. This theory, called group selection, suggests that colonies compete with other colonies, and the most successful superorganisms pass on their collective traits to new generations. This idea triggered one of the most heated scientific debates of the past 50 years. Traditional evolutionary biologists argued that group selection was impossible because selfish individuals within any group would always outcompete altruistic ones. But Wilson and others pointed to leafcutter ants as proof that something unprecedented was happening in nature. Leafcutter colonies are so incredibly complex that Wilson calls them the most complicated social system outside of humanity. These ants don't just gather food. They practice agriculture. Workers cut leaves and bring them back to underground gardens, where other workers chew the leaves into compost, fertilize it with their own waste, and cultivate fungus that feeds the entire colony. Different castes handle different aspects of this agricultural system. Tiny workers tend the gardens, medium workers harvest and process leaves, and soldier workers defend against parasites and invaders. But here's what's truly remarkable. Different colonies have distinct personalities that persist across generations. Some colonies are aggressive and expand rapidly, others are conservative and focus on defense, and still others specialize in particular types of food sources. These collective behaviors seem to be inherited traits of the superorganism, not just the sum of individual ant behaviors. Recent genetic studies have revealed something even more astounding. In the most advanced ant societies, worker ants have evolved to be so genetically similar to each other that they're essentially clones. This genetic uniformity eliminates competition between workers and allows the colony to function like a single organism with millions of identical organs. What's happening with these ant superorganisms is forcing scientists to acknowledge that evolution can work at multiple levels simultaneously. Genes compete with other genes, individuals compete with other individuals, and groups compete with other individuals, and groups compete with other groups. The most successful combinations at all these levels get to stick around and reproduce. This multi-level selection theory has implications that go way beyond understanding ants. Because if evolution can create genuine superorganisms from simpler parts, if collective intelligence can emerge from individual cooperation, then we might be looking at a preview of our own species' evolutionary future. Or perhaps we're already further down this path than we realize. The mirror of humanity, as I've been telling you this incredible story about ant societies, you've probably noticed something unsettling. These insects have mastered things that we humans are still struggling with. They've achieved perfect cooperation without losing efficiency, created sustainable societies that last for decades, developed communication systems that prevent misunderstandings, and built civilizations where every individual willingly works for the collective good. Sound familiar? It should, because ant colonies are like a funhouse mirror reflection of human society, showing us both what we've achieved and what we might become. Just like us, ants practice agriculture, build cities, wage wars, take care of their young, and create complex division of labor systems. But unlike us, they figured out how to do all of this without conflict, waste, or individuals trying to game the system for personal benefit. When scientists study ant warfare, they see tactics and strategies that mirror human military campaigns. Scouts gathering intelligence, armies using flanking maneuvers, chemical weapons deployed against enemies, and even what appears to be torture of prisoners. Some ant species raid other colonies to steal their babies, raising them as slaves in a practice that's disturbingly similar to some of humanity's darkest chapters. But ants have also achieved something that human societies have been chasing for thousands of years: perfect unity of purpose. Every ant in a colony is working toward the same goals, using the same methods, and sharing the same values. There's no corruption, no cheating, no individuals trying to take more than their fair share. It's like they've solved every social problem that has plagued human civilizations throughout history. This comparison becomes even more mind-bending when you consider that ant societies are older and more successful than human ones. While our species has only been building complex civilizations for a few thousand years, ants have been perfecting their social systems for over 100 million years. They've weathered ice ages, asteroid impacts, and mass extinctions, while maintaining their cooperative societies across hundreds of millions of generations. Maybe the most profound lesson from studying ant superorganisms is what it tells us about consciousness and intelligence. We tend to think of intelligence as something that happens inside individual brains, but ants suggest that the most powerful form of intelligence might be collective. No single ant understands how to build a nest, cultivate fungus gardens, or coordinate a military campaign. But together they accomplish all of these things with a precision that puts human organizations to shame. Could this be where human society is heading? Are we already becoming a superorganism through our technology, our global communication networks, and our increasing interdependence? When you think about how connected we've become through the internet, how specialized our roles have gotten, and how much we rely on collective knowledge that no individual person could possibly master, the parallels to ant colonies become almost to ant colonies. Frightening. Next time you're walking down a sidewalk and you see a line of ants marching past, remember that you're not just looking at a bunch of bugs. You're witnessing one of evolution's greatest experiments in collective intelligence, a form of consciousness that might be more advanced than our own, and possibly a glimpse into the future of what intelligent life can become when individual desires are perfectly aligned with collective success. These tiny creatures have built empires that dwarf our own, mastered cooperation that we can only dream of, and created a form of immortal society that has outlasted every human civilization that has ever existed. They've shown us what's possible when millions of minds work as one, and maybe, just maybe, they're showing us what we could become if we ever figure out how to put the needs of our species above our individual desires. The ants have been watching us all along, and now you know. They might just be the real rulers of this planet, and we're just getting by on their good graces. That's a wrap on today's wild journey. But here at the Zoo-phoria show, we're just getting started exploring nature's most incredible stories. Subscribe if you want to keep discovering the shocking, hilarious, and downright unbelievable truths about the animals sharing our planet. Your next favorite animal fact is just one click away.